I know I dunk on, well, I dunk on Russia, okay? I dunk on Russia anytime they're brought up. I dunk on Russia because, well, they've earned it, okay? I dunk on them as many times as I can because they've earned it. Somebody else dunks on Russia too. This guy. History of everything, Warpugs. And quite frankly, he has never done one thing, which I'm kind of surprised about. Well, he did it. He did it originally. But he never really talked about what happened during the fight. Okay? Guys, this is the worst defeat of the Russian Navy. If you've never heard of the glorious, oh, he's going, not this time, that Moss, not this time, not today. Guys, we're just gonna jump into this. Warpugs, it's history of everything. And he's talking about Tsushima. Warpugs, this is horrific, okay? This is gonna be one of the most horrific stories you ever heard about naval combat, period. It was the most brutal beatdown of a navy. And to be quite honest, it's one of those situations where everyone who saw what was happening, who had a lick of common sense, hated the fact that they were there, and everybody in leadership didn't know why it went so badly. Warpugs, history of everything, links in the description. The Russian Navy Sucks, part 6555. Let's go. Hold on, let's go. Hold on, I gotta turn it up because I'm stupid.
So, long story short, this was supposed to be a video about the Vichy French-Siam War over the control of Indochina during the early years of the Second World War. However, I had a cool sponsor reach out that I think a lot of you, particularly those of the anime variety fan base, would like.
Oh!
And because of that, you're getting a video about the Battle of Tsushima.
Please tell me it's Azure Lake.
One of Russia's worst ever defeats at sea so far. That brings us to the sponsor of today's video, Sakuriko. Now, I know many of you are weebs. It so happens that I am not. I'm clearly better than you because of it.
What makes you say that?
But above all, what I am is a foodie. And if you couldn't tell my divinely thin figure, we align extremely well here on the fact that you like Japanese products, I like Japanese food. It's a match made in heaven.
Yay!
I accept your problems, you accept mine. So instead of showing you a terrible ration today and putting something horrific in my body, I'm showing you this amazing snack box by Sakuriko. Oh. Click the link in the description to order yourself a box. They are extremely well priced, and I get a little bit off every sale from the link, from my affiliate link in the description of the comments. Now, inside these boxes, you get a treasure trove of snacks, goodies, like I got a little plate, it was cool. And the best part, you actually support the conservation of historical food making by doing it. And that's the coolest bit to me, is that you're helping keep history alive through eating snacks. Like, what's not to love? Each box comes with a guidebook telling you how each snack is made, the history of it, and some interesting facts about it, you know, along with dietary requirements and stuff for food allergies. And genuinely, it's brilliant. I get to snack. It's snacks that don't make me feel extremely unhealthy. You get to help protect some history and try new things. And you also get to learn something along the way. So, again, what's not to love?
No, dude, the Laser Pig is massively haunted by the MRE. Laser Pig is massively haunted by the MRE. He is haunted by that thing, and I don't blame him either, okay? Because I would be haunted by that too, okay?
Month's box, which I've been showing on screen from my unpacking of it, it's all cherry blossom themed, which is, again, really cool. And there's this nifty bit of artwork and description that comes with it too. So click the link in the description or pinned comment. Anything you order from this supports the channel in a huge way, and you get snacks out of it. And because of them, you're getting a video about the Battle of Tsushima. So really, at the end of the day, they're already paying dividends for you.
I might actually do this. I might get this. I'm gonna check and see if I can do this. This actually looks really, it looks really nice, one. And two, I like snacks. Yes! The music, Warpugs! The glory! This is why you don't take a bunch of people who have never even seen an ocean, put them on a ship, and then send them on their way. This is why you don't. This is why you don't. North Koreans don't get MREs. North Koreans get the love of Kim Jong-sun, whatever the crap his name is. Russia's big oopsie.
Now, you all know the story of the 2nd Pacific Squadron, the Kamchatka, the torpedo boats, the comedy, the zoo, the torpedo boats, the pain of the Aurora, and, well, the torpedo boats.
Yes.
But that video, the one that started the channel, I ended it right as the Japanese fleet found the Russians. Well, more specifically, as the Russians accidentally found the Japanese fleet, but we'll get into that. I didn't go into the absolute insane smackdown that followed it, until now.
Yay!
The Battle of Tsushima was fought on the 27th and 28th of May 1905, and it stands as one of the most decisive naval engagements in history. It's hard to put it any other way. It changed absolutely everything. It was a modern Trafalgar.
I don't think this was a modern Trafalgar. This was pretty much... Okay, this was so bad. This was so... Oh my god. Bad. Okay? This was so... If you're looking at military engagements in terms of naval battles, this battle would be the United States versus Venezuela when we got Maduro. Okay? That's how one-sided this was. This was horrifically one-sided.
It took place during the final phase of the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, and the battle resulted in the near total destruction or capture of the Russian Baltic Fleet by the Imperial Japanese Navy.
It wasn't the Japanese Midway, it was
Tsushima marked
worse.
a turning point in global warfare. It demonstrated just how effective modern technology could be if you...
Headhunter, the Japanese screwed up at Midway. You know, they could have fought, they could have made a fight out of it, a much better fight than they did. They just decisively lost. This wasn't a decisive loss. This was just an ass whipping. Okay, like Daddy Japan pulled off the belt and whipped Russia's ass. That's what happened during this.
Used correctly with correct doctrines, and it shifted the balance of power in East Asia away from Europe. But above all of this, it shattered forever the idea that the Europeans were superior in every way to the uncivilized world in the art of war, even if the Europeans didn't just take the hint yet. Oh, and to add to that, it directly helped lead to multiple revolutions within the Russian Empire and, quite literally, Pearl Harbor. Now, I won't focus too much on the conflict, just to give you a bit of backstory and set the scene though. By the late 19th century, Russia sought warm water ports in the Pacific and had expanded its influence across Siberia, and this culminated in the construction of the Trans-Siberian Railway in a region dubbed Yellow Russia. Yes, it's called yellow because it's in China. Yes, it has the connotations you think it has.
It does.
Japan, recently modernized through a brutal civil war called the Meiji Restoration, viewed Russian expansion as a direct threat to its security and its regional ambitions, aka Japan and Russia both wanted to expand in the same region. Tensions escalated throughout the early 1900s, and in February 1904, Japan launched a surprise attack on the Russian fleet at Port Arthur. And here we have arrived at the Russo-Japanese War.
Hooray!
Although the attack did not completely destroy the Russian naval power in the Far East, it effectively bottled up the Russian Pacific Fleet. As the war progressed, Japanese land forces achieved a series of victories in Manchuria, while Japan gradually tightened its naval blockade of Port Arthur. By the end of 1904, the Russian position in the Far East had deteriorated significantly. Port Arthur fell in January 1905, and it eliminated Russia's primary Pacific naval base as the relief fleet sat idle in Madagascar, having sailed from Europe months earlier. It was kind of busy being a zoo and having boat races and shooting the Aurora and, you know, all the stuff and all the chameleons at the flagship that you couldn't see the problem. You get the jokes. You remember where I came from with that.
Yeah.
Anyway, the fleet was now given a new task: break through the blockade and make for Vladivostok. As the floating circus made its way around the world, nearly starting multiple wars and ruining Russian relations in a way that would impress even Vladimir Putin, the Japanese combined fleet commanded by Admiral Togo made its preparations. A highly respected officer educated in Britain and deeply familiar with modern naval doctrine, Togo understood that Japan's victory depended on preventing the Russian fleet from reaching Vladivostok, where it could threaten Japanese supply lines and prolong the war. Japanese intelligence played a crucial role in the coming battle, so Japan monitored Russian movements closely, and correctly predicted that the Russians would attempt to pass through the Tsushima Strait, the shortest, most direct route to Vladivostok. The Japanese Navy therefore deployed scouting ships and prepared a coordinated interception plan relying heavily on wireless telegraphy, a relatively new but incredibly decisive technology. The idea was the fleet would be ready, combined, and waiting, ready to go at a moment's notice when it came to preparing steam, and when news came, it would steam at full speed to engage. Unlike the Russians, the Japanese crews were well trained from the start. They were highly motivated and experienced from earlier naval engagements in the war.
And the Russian sailors were mostly pulled from a place in the middle of the damned continent and had never seen a body of water before. Absolute stupidity.
Japanese ships were faster, better maintained, and equipped with the superior ammunition choices. The gap between the two fleets cannot be understated here. While we're here, I think it's important to go over the battle fleets just so we can get an idea of who is facing who. The Russian fleet consisted of a total of 11 battleships, but I use that term extremely loosely. The 4 battleships that really mattered here were the Suvorov, which was the flagship, Imperator Alexander III, Borodino, and Oriol. All of the Borodino class, and all taking heavy influences from French shipbuilding conventions. They had the pronounced tumble home hull, for example. There were multiple older battleships too, including the Oslabaya, Sysoy Veliki, Navarin, Imperator Alexander II, General Ushakov, Admiral Senevin, and Admiral Ushakov. However, those last few, they were all technically coastal battleships, and also they had the distinction of being the Sink by Themselves Squadron. Yes, that was their nickname. It's very, very positive.
Yeah.
Facing this ragtag group of ships with 4 modern ships and, a collection of old ones was the very frighteningly modern Imperial Japanese Navy combined fleet, led by the battleship Mikasa, followed by Shikishima, Fuji, and Asahi, and a whopping 29 cruisers, 21 destroyers, 45 torpedo boats, and 22 auxiliaries.
Ugh.
Russia only had 9 destroyers, 9 auxiliaries, including the Kamchatka, which is kind of a negative modifier, and 9 cruisers. Japan was completely strapped in this situation and ready to go. In the early hours of the 27th of May 1905, Japanese scouting ships sighted the Russian fleet entering Tsushima Strait under foggy conditions. In a funny turn of fate, this occurred because the Russian ships, the ships that had been freaking out and misidentifying everything that floats the entire voyage, including shooting up a British fishing fleet for being Japanese torpedo boats, didn't recognize the Japanese ships in the region and signaled them basically saying, "Hi, we're here."
This is the most bag-on-head, stupid military exercise in human history, okay? If you really want to know, the Russian fleet going into this was the most bag-on-head, stupid operation in military history. I don't think it can ever be topped. He was not joking. If you don't know how this fleet got here, when they went through the English Channel, they were convinced they were under attack by Japanese torpedo boats the whole damned way. Okay? And then they spot Japanese torpedo boats and signal them saying, "Hey, we're friendlies." I'm not kidding about... I don't understand. I just don't get it.
At approximately 4:45 in the morning, the Russian presence was confirmed, and wireless signals were rapidly alerted Admiral Togo on the battleship Mikasa, and he set the whole combined fleet to sea. Throughout the morning, Togo maneuvered his fleet into an advantageous position, ensuring that his main force would engage the Russian line under optimal conditions. The Russians, travelling in a long, unwieldy formation, were already at a disadvantage. Their slower speed and poor coordination made it difficult for them to respond effectively to the Japanese movements too. Now keep in mind the Russian fleet had been at sea for an incredibly long time on an incredibly hard voyage. Granted, a lot of the hardness was of their own making, but it was still exhausted. The ship's hulls were dirty, and they were slowed because of it. By late morning though, both fleets were aware that they were going to start shooting at each other very, very soon, and the stage was completely set. At approximately 13:30, the two fleets finally made visual contact, and shortly thereafter the first shots were fired. Admiral Togo wasted absolutely no time in executing one of the most famous maneuvers in naval warfare, crossing the T. By turning his fleet across the head of the Russian formation and using his speed, Togo positioned his ships so that they could bring their full broadsides to bear, while the Russians could reply only with their forward guns, and this completely negated any perceived disadvantage the amount of large caliber guns on all the Russian battleships had. From around 1400 to...
Yeah, if the Russians could have actually hit anything, that would have been a sight. That would have been an absolute sight, Warpugs.
1600s, the Japanese battleships and cruisers unleashed intense, accurate fire. Japanese shells caused massive damage upon impact too. They started fires, they destroyed command and communication systems. The battleship Ostabaia, an older Perezadet class, was sunk very early in the engagement due to this withering fire, while the Kuznets Suvorov, Admiral Rozhestvensky's flagship, was completely crippled.
Sankili, I think it was lower than that.
The Russians didn't go down without firing back, though, because throughout the voyage, with, all the hell and misery that likely eventually attributed to the death of Rozhestvensky, he had managed to beat some kind of gunnery into his crews. The Russian ships fought as hard as they could on this doomed endeavour, and they fired into the Japanese ships, causing significant damage. But it was nothing significant enough to stop the Japanese ships. The Russians would also desperately attempt to maintain formation, but confusions just began to spread rapidly. Signals began to be misunderstood or ignored, ships started to collide, fall out of line, and coordination became impossible. The Japanese, by contrast, maintained disciplined formations and concentrated their fire, picking one target and moving on to the next, with devastating efficiency. For those wondering, Kamchatka was lit up by Japanese gunfire during this period, and she went down, leaving 50 of her crew in the sea. These men would be picked up by fishermen and other Japanese vessels and taken as prisoners of war. We still have no idea why the Kamchatka was as stupid as it was, but hey, that's what happened to it. By late afternoon on the 27th, the Russian fleet was in complete chaos. Rozhestvensky was severely wounded, and effective centralized command had ceased to exist. Individual Russian ships fought on, with some attempting to break through to get to Vladivostok, and others doubled back to run south or seek interment in the Philippines. The light cruiser Zemchug, for example, one that we've spoken about before that would later be sunk in the First World War by a German raider, was one of these ships. She ran south to hide in Manila. As darkness fell, the Japanese shifted tactics. Instead of continuing gunnery duels in the fading light, Togo ordered his battleships to hold, sending his destroyers and torpedo boats in to launch night attacks against the disorganized Russian fleet. These attacks were relentless and terrifying, and they exploited the Russian fleet's exhaustion and its disorientation. Throughout the night, torpedoes struck multiple Russian ships, sinking some and disabling others. Crews abandoned their burning vessels, and survivors were left struggling in the cold waters, only to be picked up by Japanese fishermen, or also Japanese warships. At dawn on the 28th, the small part of the Russian fleet that had maintained its cohesion attempted to escape northwards to Vladivostok, but only a handful of ships remained operational, and many were damaged, low on ammunition, or completely out of coal and unable to retain high speeds. The Japanese forces refused to let the Russians breathe here, and they pursued them relentlessly. By mid-morning, the Japanese ships had surrounded several Russian battleships under the command of Rear Admiral Nikolai Nabokotov, who had assumed command after Rozhestvensky was rendered unconscious. Recognizing the hopelessness of his situation, and unwilling to sacrifice more lives, which, rare for a Russian commander.
I know, it's shocking.
Nabokotov made the extraordinary decision to surrender at approximately 10:30. Several Russian ships, including the battleships Oriol, had their colours struck and were boarded. Other Russian vessels were sunk, scuttled by their crews, or fled to neutral ports where they were interned. By the end of the 28th, the battle was over. The Russian Baltic Fleet had ceased to exist as a fighting force.
Warpugs, I can't even... The concept... I used to board boats. That's what I did when I was in the Navy. For a time, I boarded boats. I can't imagine boarding an enemy boat, like actually boarding an enemy boat that we're at war with that had struck their colors. What striking the colors means is literally you take down your nation's flag, you throw up a white flag of surrender. It's been a long time since any country's Navy has done this. A very, very long time.
In such a decisive manner that you could easily compare its destruction to that of the French at Trafalgar.
Ugh.
The scale of the Russian defeat, simply put, is staggering. Of approximately 38 ships that entered the battle, 21 were sunk, 7 were captured, and most of the remainder were interned or escaped in damaged conditions. 5,000 Russian sailors were gone in an afternoon. Russian casualties numbered in the thousands, with many sailors killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. Japanese losses, meanwhile, were incredibly light by comparison. Japan lost no battleships and suffered relatively low casualties. The destruction of the Russian fleet eliminated any remaining hope that Russia could continue the war effectively. Within months, both sides entered negotiations, leading to the Treaty of Portsmouth in September 1905, mediated by US President Theodore Roosevelt. The Japanese, following their capture of enemy ships, would actually take multiple Russian vessels into service. The Oriole, for example, would become the battleship Iwami, and the cruiser Variag, captured in the war, would also enter service. Japan entered the war arguably weaker and with less ships than it left the war. It almost got an entire free battleship squadron with cruisers and escorts to boot from the Russians here. But, dear viewer, I hear you may ask, what happened to Rozhestvensky? I mentioned he was wounded, but let's go over his life after the battle and how he got away.
Oh boy.
During the battle, Rozhestvensky took at least 2 separate wounds. The first wound was not too serious and he was able to remain at his post and command effectively. However, the second wound he suffered caused significant injuries to his head and legs.
Nice.
These wounds were caused by repeated hits to the exposed conning tower.
This poor guy, I swear, they actually had a box of binoculars because he got in the habit of being so pissed off on this journey, he would throw the binoculars overboard.
And due to how dangerous the situation was becoming, the Admiral and survivors were brought below. It is here that details get hazy, to say the least, because we have no idea where and what he got up to until he was later found sitting in the remains of the ship's right 6-inch turret, where he remained for about an hour before losing consciousness due to his wounds. The unconscious Admiral was then transferred to the destroyer Buini by loyal sailors, and it was here that Rozhestvensky regained consciousness very briefly. The destroyer, however, would suffer from engine problems caused by the barrage from the Japanese ships, and so now again the unconscious Admiral was transferred to the destroyer Budovi, and he would be taken prisoner when Budovi was later captured by the destroyer Sazanami. He would later remain in captivity until after the signing of the Treaty of Portsmouth, when he would at last be returned to St. Petersburg via the Trans-Siberian Railway. In one of the most interesting conversations that we will never hear from history, the victorious Admiral Toga would later visit him during his convalescence. Allegedly is doing a lot of reaching here because I couldn't find anything to actually confirm he completely said this. He did console Rozhestvensky by telling him that defeat is the common fate of a soldier. There is nothing to be ashamed of in it. The great point is whether or not we have performed our duty. I've seen 5 different versions of that quote, and to me it stings a bit of possible post-war propaganda.
Probably
maybe.
is.
But, you know, what I would give to hear that conversation, I'm sure they spoke about something incredibly interesting during it. Most likely they probably did it in French or something, or with interpreters into French, because a lot of Russians spoke French, and it's a diplomatic language. With the end of the war, Rozhestvensky left Japan on November 23rd aboard the transport Yakut. This was supposed to be sooner, but he was delayed a bit by over a week first due to the fact Rozhestvensky demanded that he take a Russian ship. But then riots in Vladivostok and a mutiny on the first ship he attempted to take kind of stopped that.
Right.
You know, standard Imperial Russia shenanigans at this point. In 1906, Rozhestvensky, now back in Russia, faced court-martial for the disaster, along with each of his surviving battleship commanders. Some were sent
because of course they blamed him for this, and yes, you did get a Bethesda loading screen for this, because of course they blamed him for this. He was actually a competent commander. I'm just surprised the man had hair. Because with the amount of bullshit that he put up with, the amount of stupidity that he had to put up with, just, you can be as competent a commander as you want to be, but if you get handed the kind of crap that he got handed, my God, we celebrate MacArthur. People that don't know this guy laugh at him, but my God, man, the amount of head trauma that he had from the amount of times that he slammed his forehead into a wall must have been severe.
To prison and some to firing squad for either losing the battle or surrendering their ships. To be captured, the Tsar's court was fully aware that Admiral Nebogotov had surrendered the fleet and not Rozhestvensky as he had been wounded. and unconscious for most of the battle.
Right.
But Rozhestvensky was adamant in the defense of his admiral, saying that as commander, he maintained total and sole responsibility, pleading guilty to losing the battle as, after all, he was the admiral and the buck stopped with him.
Right.
As was expected by the courts,
Good
though,
man.
this was all a formality, as the Tsar commuted the death sentences to the captains to short prison terms and pardons for the remaining officers.
Right.
What you got depended on how important you were to the imperial court, to be
Of
completely
course.
honest. Rozhestvensky would actually survive for 5 more years before dying in 1909. Naturally, his cause of death, as many would say, was not at all service or stress related. In a way, his death in 1909 is kind of merciful, though. It means he didn't have to see the revolution and the horrifying fates that befell many other Russian officers.
Right.
One fun fact about the man is he carried on quite literally dozens of insane affairs. He would make Babington blush.
Wow.
There's like 3 people who'll get that reference. And
Okay.
he turned
Hold on a
many
second.
high-ranking...
You don't have to mute.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
You want some food?
In a little bit, yeah. Like, a little bit, yeah.
Well, just
Okay.
let me know when you're done, okay?
Okay.
I'll come down and make us something.
She's here. She's here. Everybody say hey to the hospital. Let's go.
Russian sailors into
Hi.
complete cuckolds. Just in case you didn't find him
Let
funny
me back that up.
blush. There's like 3 people who'll get that reference.
Mm.
And he turned many high-ranking Russian sailors into complete cuckolds.
There you
Just
go.
in case you didn't find him funny enough for his actions with the binoculars and the screaming at other ships, he was also cuckolding half of the Russian naval command. Thank you again to Securico for sponsoring the channel and the video. I will include my affiliate link in the description below and or the pinned comment. I
That is
really
so
do
neat.
think they're an awesome deal, and the price is really, really good for a number of things you actually receive, and on top of that, you are helping preserve traditional cooking methods, and to me, that's kind of the coolest part, because, yeah, how often do we get to say that we get to, eat things as they were traditionally cooked?
What? Yeah.
Special thanks, as always, to patrons, channel members. There's now over 200 members, and I think it's 180 patrons, which is, like, mental to me. Paying patrons, I should clarify. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you all next time.
Warpugs. That poor guy. The amount of head trauma that he got from headbutting a wall must have been astronomical, okay? You couldn't have asked me to put up with this crap. Like, I went bald from dealing with the ridiculousness that I had to put up with. I couldn't imagine being in charge of a fleet and then having the kind of crap that he had to put up with, because okay, so anytime I hear about the Bureau of Ordnance, I legitimately start losing my mind. The Bureau of Ordnance from World War II. Anytime I start hearing about that, I start losing my mind. The Russian Navy was the Bureau of Ordnance. Just laying it out there. The Russian Navy, at every level, was as incompetent or more incompetent than the Bureau of Ordnance. Ow. I just hurt myself. Warpugs, if you're checking this out on YouTube, get yourself some Japanese treats. Get yourself some Japanese snacks. I know I'm going to be putting that in the description down below, and I'm probably going to go check out and see how much it's going to be per month. Because that looks awesome. I'm not even going to lie. I'm a fat guy, and I love snacks. God. Oh, man. Dude. The amount of head trauma that this guy would have had. Japanese anime, because it's everywhere. Yeah, Fox Leader. But I'll tell you this. He had to... From getting cut off at the Suez Canal, because the British controlled the Suez Canal at that point, and because they decided they were going to do slam dance with a whole bunch of British trawlers, they got cut off from that. And then they pull into Madagascar, and the whole damn thing, there's a crocodile on the damn boat. Nobody knows how it got there. The Kamchatka, which was the bane of this guy's existence, if that thing would have sunk, that was the one vessel I'm pretty much guessing he would have been fine with just sinking. Because that thing continued to be a pain in the ass, no matter what he did with it. Warpugs, history of everything, links in the description. My God, man. Thank God the Russian Navy exists, so we have an example of what to never become.